Apologies to the public and senior staff. We were running a couple minutes late, so I do appreciate your patience as we get caught up to speed back here. First order of business, do we have any commissioners participating remotely at this point in time? Do we know from our technology team? Would be 2. All right. At this point in time, since there's no commissioners online, just confirm one more time, there's no commissioners online. Any commissioners online, please speak up now. All right, hearing none, we're going to pass through item number 2 as there's no need for a general consensus. I'm sorry? 2. And Mirza. Annabelle and Mirza. Just commissioners, make sure you have your mic up close so our court reporter can hear us. At this time, we do have public comment here at the JHA meeting. Do we have any public comments at the moment? Anybody would like to speak from the public, whether here in the room or online? We'll leave it open for another second here. Anybody else that would like to speak publicly at this point in time in front of the Housing Authority? Okay, hearing nobody, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Next order of business, chair's comment, which I'm going to demur till the end of the presentation, which moves us into the approval of the prior board meeting of September 27th, 2001. The commissioners should have a transcript in front of them. I've taken a look through the transcript and had no material changes whatsoever. Appreciate our court reporter yet again. Are there any questions or comments relative to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
I make a motion.
I have a motion from Ms. Brock, a second by Commissioner Griggs. Any discussion? If none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is the agency financial overview by our CFO, Mr. Lohr. Dennis, would you mind going ahead and presenting for us here, please?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The Finance Committee met last week, and we reviewed the financial statements as of September 30th, 2021. September 30th is the end of our fiscal year, so these are preliminary financials, which represent our activity for the full year, and as preliminary, there will be changes when we go through the audit. So starting with our summary, we have operating funds, and our total operating income by source at the end of September is just over $7 million. And then looking at our programs, starting with the central office, we're over budget on income by 2%. We actually ended up the year with 82,000, almost 83,000 additional than what we had budgeted. On the expense side, we did very well. We're 1% over budget, so very close. We finished the year 3.3 million of actual expenses. For public housing, we were over budget by 13%. 2,658,000, and as we know, Hogan Creek took extra time to close, and that was the main reason for the increase in income. On the expense side, we were over budget by about 6%, 918,000, and again, it's due to Hogan Creek, all of the operating expenses for about 9 months. For our Section 8 program, we ended up the year at 109% for our income. This is just for our admin fees. So we ended up with about $650,000 in admin fees, more than we had anticipated, and this was due to having more vouchers than we had anticipated originally. For our expenses, we kept them pretty much right in line with where we budgeted. We were over by 1%, about $33,000 over budget. And then for Gregory West, we hit our income target right on track. We're actually over by $4,269, so that's very good. And for our expenses, we're 20% under budget, so that's excellent. We finished the year under budget by $173,000, so that's very good. For our RAD properties, our income is at 60% of our budget. And again, this is due to Hogan Creek closing 9 months into our fiscal year. So our budget was short by about $2 million. And then for our expenses, we're at 66%, $1.9 million of expenses. So we are again short of what our budget is, but again, it's due to Hogan Creek being closing in June. And then for our cash reserves, we ended up the year at just over $42 million of total reserves, and the reserves take into consideration all of our current liabilities. So these reserves are after all of our current liabilities are met. And every month we look at our quick ratio and our MENAR. Our quick ratio, we're between 3.92%, which is right where we're supposed to be, and the highest amount we're over 24%. So this tells us how many times we can pay our debts, and typically public housing doesn't have very much debt, but this is how many times we can cover our liabilities. And then our MENAR, we ended up the month at 11.57. And again, this is the number of months that we could cover our expenses if HUD stopped giving us operating subsidy. And next we'll look at Brentwood Park. Brentwood Park, we were 8% over budget on income. We ended up the year $240,000 of additional income, higher than what was budgeted. And for our expenses, we were 3% over budget. We finished the year $80,000 over what we had anticipated. Questions?
I just have one question. Normally you send us the spreadsheet. We get the spreadsheet in our fees. I didn't see Brentwood in here. Is it in here? Sorry. I'm looking for the spreadsheet. I'm looking for the Brentwood report.
Okay, it should have been in that packet.
Okay, I didn't see. Maybe I overlooked it, but okay, that's it.
We can send it to you.
That's all right.
Okay. Any other questions?
Commissioner?
Yes, speak. Something for the board to consider, or that I would like for us to look at over the next couple of meetings, is there's 8 units or 8 properties we own or use that don't have dryers. They're doing drying the clothes on clotheslines. And in the finance meeting, Dwayne went over what those projected costs would be to provide some type of laundromat or dryer hookups to each of the units. And it was like 3.3 million, but of that number, 1.3 million was for one project because it was a complete remodel. So Dennis, if we were to provide some type of laundromat for these units, where would the money come from? And
so we have two options. One would be capital fund. So we could budget it into our capital fund over the next several years, do a property every year, or a property or two.
Mhm.
The other option is to use some of our operating reserves to work.
It has to be one or the other?
Or a combination.
Okay. I mean, as a board, is this something that you guys want to take on?
To me, I think that's a great question. To me, provided that the operating reserves, which I believe those should be used for a project like this, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Orr,
Yeah.
provided that the reserves account for it and it's an appropriate use of funds, I certainly have no objection to exploring the use of those funds for improving a property. But I think it would, to your point, I think we probably want to understand exactly. I hear generally what you're asking,
Mhm.
but I think we need to see exactly what we're looking to do because that's not a small expenditure for sure.
Right, I want to say if we take out the $1.3 million one, it was like probably an average of $200,000 per location.
Per location.
Maybe a little more than that, maybe like 225. We went over them one by one. But I mean, it's 2021 and some people are having to drive their clothes outside still.
Yeah. Mr. Alexander, is that something you want to bring to the table today? Are you looking for consensus on, or are you looking to present this to us at a future meeting?
I think that I think it's something we do back. I think it's something that we need to go back, hash out the numbers and show exactly what it would take to do that specific task and take it back to the finance committee before it comes to the board. I think it should go through that process first.
Commissioner Phillips?
Would this fall under modernization? Would that be what it's classified, which is a capital expenditure and a
That is
capital
correct.
use? But I think at a previous meeting, Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, we had some discussion about having an overall plan for upgrading of our properties. Would that not be included in that overall upgrade or modernization? And just as we are looking at doing these types of activities, I think the reason why we asked for that was so we could prioritize what's the most important needs for it. Having readily available laundry facilities, I think is a great use of funds, but I don't know what other needs are out there. And so
Yes.
that's what I'm asking.
Commissioner Phillips, that's a great point. Mr. Alexander, when was the last time we did a physical needs assessment on our properties?
It all depends on what property it is. We do physical needs on the last Hogan Creek, Centennial Towers, Jack's Beach, all of the other ones. I have to go back and confirm, but if we did a capital needs assessment on it. Commissioner Phillips is correct with a comprehensive plan. We have been working off a comprehensive plan addressing some of the high level issues that we've been having problems with. As I brought to the board several times, we replaced all the roofs in scattered site. We replaced the roofs at Blodgett. So we're going through our list of things. We hadn't had that on the list, but we definitely put that on the list and rank it accordingly so that we can make some accommodations for those folks over there.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, I think that to Commissioner Phillips' point, I think this would be a very wise use of money to have laundry facilities. I think it would be wise of the agency to spend the money to get capital needs assessments. You know, if we have a capital needs assessments on our properties that are, you know, call it 3 years or older, we probably need a new PCNA so we understand what our capital needs really are on these properties.
Yes.
And then from there, to Commissioner Green's point, begin building this out. And I think this would be a great first step. I mean, clearly this is something our property should probably have.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Green, did you have a comment?
Yeah, are we able to actually, when you do the modernization piece on which units or which properties need such and such, is that in a different meeting? Because I don't think I've seen.
No, we haven't had a different meeting, and that was the purpose of us setting up these committee meetings. So when we have these type of requests or situations, we can actually bring it to the board and filter it through bring it to the committees and filter it through the committees prior to bringing it to the board.
Okay.
So in the finance meeting, we gave you an assessment with the costs and the task of what it would take to do all of those specific properties. You're correct that one of them was $1.3 million, but that $1.3 million property is the property that we had that was aged since 1961, and we did very little upgrades on that property. So that was a high priority on it, but we would definitely consider and go back and look at what it would take to put the laundromats at specific properties.
I mean, maybe it's laundromats for some, but other places need something completely different. So,
Hookups.
Commissioner Griggs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering at this point, would it be appropriate to maybe have something like this fall upon when we have an acquisitions, I guess, assessment? Maybe this is a modernization and acquisition subcommittee, and sort of look at all of those potential expenditures at one time. Because I would hate that we're out here looking at properties to acquire when we have work to do modernizing our own, and maybe perhaps if they were all in one overarching strategy, that might make sense.
Okay, so Commissioner Griggs, I concur, and perhaps I will, under the new business or chair's comments, we can go down that path, because I think that's a very good idea, perhaps an ad hoc committee that can look, assess these things, and, bring recommendations to the board. I think that's a very wise decision. Any other comments on the financials before we get started? Any other comments on the financials? Hearing none, thank you very much. And I apologize, we don't need to approve the financials, do we? No, thank you. Next, we have presentation of operation resolutions which require board action. Mr. Alexander, would you mind giving us a quick run through here, please?
Yes, thank you. First, the resolutions, Antonio. Okay, thank you. So, resolution 2021 JHA 31, we took to the finance committee and we asked the board to approve the write-off of $8,138.71 in delinquent repayment agreement accounts receivable.
Commissioner Green, was there any conversation or discussions at finance, and what was the finance committee's recommendation here?
We were trying to get a amendment approved to give him a certain number to not have to bring this to the table for us to go over each of these bad debt expenses.
Okay, we can add that to the new business. Was there any concerns about the specific resolution?
No,
Mr.
sir.
Green? Thank you, Commissioner. Before I open it up for vote, any other questions or comments on this one? Okay, at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve resolution number 2021 JHA 31.
Approval of JHA 2021-31. Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Phillips and a second from Commissioner Brock. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Mr. Alexander.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. We're asking the board resolution 2021 JHA 32 to approve the write-off of $66,338.58 in delinquent public housing tenant accounts receivable. And as you all may know, this is the quarterly numbers.
Commissioner Green, any comments or recommendations from finance?
No.
Hearing none, any other questions from any commissioners? Commissioner Phillips.
Question, it's a little higher, even though it's a quarter. Typically, are we seeing a pattern or what's?
Well, this was because we added, we had a fire at one of the units, which we explained to the panel, well, the committee. And we had charged the expenses, and that's how they became delinquent.
So I have a question, Mr. Alexander. When you say you charge the expenses, the expenses were allocated as part of this
Yeah, well,
write-off?
we charge the expenses, we charge the tenants, anytime we have any damage.
Oh,
to a
I
unit,
see.
We charge it back to the unit,
Okay,
charge it back to the tenants, and then we write it off if they don't pay it, and then we move it over to the collection agency.
So the fire was, through the chair, caused by the tenant? The
That is
tenant
correct,
Created the fire?
yes.
okay.
So the majority of this is for that one?
That one tenant, I believe it was about $21,000, somewhere $21,000 it was, that's correct.
Commissioner-
Insurance doesn't cover that?
Yeah, our
It did.
insurance covers, but it don't cover for the first, I believe it's the first $25,000 they don't cover us for.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
I make a motion, Mr. Chair, for approval for resolution JHA 2021.
I have a motion on the table to approve resolution number 2021 JHA 32. I have a second.
A second.
Seconded by Commissioner Green. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, resolution 2021 JHA 32 is approved. Thank you. Mr. Alexander, would you mind commencing your report, please?
Yes, and I'll make it quick. We issued you all a copy of the end of the year report. Did any of the commissioners have any questions? That was a part of your board package. It was a summary of all that went out through the fiscal year for public housing, Section 8, resident services, procurement, and compliance. So we captured all the activities in HR, all the departments. Is there any questions? Okay,
I haven't finished reading it all, but I
okay,
did,
thank you.
but I did get started. So if I have any questions in the future, I'll.
Yeah, there was a lot of good highlights in here that staff had a great year in accomplishing some of the goals that we had set forth. Moving forward, there's a couple things I just wanted to go through. We have these three projects, we had the three projects underneath RAD. We received a significant amount of money because the RAD rents are a lot higher than public housing rents. When you look at Centennial Towers, from the 14th floor down to the 7th, all completed. Residents are moved back in those units, and we currently, right now, working on one of the elevators, installing a new elevator over there. So hopefully we'll be able to get these things, all these things done over the next several months. When it comes to Hogan Creek, they're working on the 16th floor all the way down to the 12th floor. And the 16th floor residents will be able to move back in there by November the 16th, just in time for Thanksgiving. We also looking at our next steps for our RAD units. We want to bring in front of the committee or the board some ideas we have with a couple additional problems we like to add to RAD, just so we can get be able to get the extra funding to help do a gut rehab on the building, as well as get higher rents for the property and to modernize the property. And we're also looking at several other programs. They have the other programs, which are demonstration programs similar to RAD, is the housing choice neighborhoods program, as well as the moving to work demonstration program. HUD is looking to add 59 more housing authorities to that program. We're looking to put ourselves in that group. And that moving to work program allows, it removes some of the restrictions from public housing in Section 8, which you can be able to do other things for other programs, more so than restricting public housing money to public housing and Section 8 money to Section 8. Also, I did issue out or pass out a memorandum that the board asked for at the last meeting. They asked us to compose a framework for issuance of the subpoena to the private management company. I did send an additional email out to the management company. They couldn't make it to the meeting. They responded by email, and they forwarded me an email that they sent to City Council and addressing the rodents issue. They said that the rodent issue has declined quite a bit, but they have under contract Terminex, who is working to continue to alleviate the problem altogether. That's all they said. Any of the repairs, some of the other highlighted things they didn't include in a response. So I have the framework here that the board asked me to put together. So I think that our first response will be to issue a correspondence to the property management company and prepare to issue a letter.
Mr. Alexander, if I may, I'd like to table this to the new business section so we can get through the rest of your report if that'd be,
Okay.
if that's okay. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes, I was going to get carried away there.
Don't get too excited. What about the, did you do anything else to report on your CEO report, acquisitions, anything like that?
Yes, sure. They have on the table the acquisition report. I'll wait till you give your information. We did the legwork on a couple properties and see the viabilities of the properties. I think it's a total of 7 properties there that the acquisition team put together. And there's a total purchase amount is $180 million. But I just gave that to you because there's some things that we need to do in the committee prior to getting the point. I just wanted to make sure that the commissioners had the document so that to see that the team as well as the rest of the employees are aggressively going out looking for options for low-income housing. One of the things is that we are also reaching out to HUD because I mentioned underneath the fair cloth, we allowed up to 3,100 units. And as these units come off public housing, they go underneath Section 8, we can fulfill that gap with those units.
Are these, sorry, Mr. Alexander, are these underwritten assuming current rents or assuming public housing rents or a mixture of both?
It could be a combination of both. That's why I'm waiting to get some confirmation from HUD. I know that the units that we move on from underneath the under project base are getting the fair market rents for Section 8, but bringing them back underneath the public housing program, I would assume they would be underneath the public housing rent. But I just want to make sure I have that facts and I'll get a response back from HUD.
Okay.
But again, I'll just put on the table the drastic need for us to really look at increasing our housing portfolio. As I spoke to the board previously, Jacksonville is a very hot market right now. Rents are going up. Rent up as of October the 19th. The market analysis shows that the rents have went up in Jacksonville 20.9%. It's a small percentage out there for affordable housing. The absorption rate is extremely high. So I'm glad that this board is considering or looking into the fact of wanting to expand what we're doing.
Okay. Commissioner Griggs.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And this is good stuff. You guys are out hustling. And
Yes.
I appreciate that. But what I'd like to find out is the strategy behind this. Are we looking to acquire property or potentially acquire property to keep it at a, at a workforce housing rate, keep the rents from going up, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
that, or are we trying to increase overall housing authority inventory? What is the method behind the madness?
Okay, good question. We're looking to increase units in general. The housing stock here, clearly, we don't have enough housing stock. In affordable housing market, only 18% is geared towards affordable housing, and 8% is geared towards senior citizens, and 3% is geared towards students. The issue is that folks get more money for student units and senior units, almost twice the amount of money than they do for affordable housing. So I don't see the effort there as significant as the conventional market. So as Jacksonville grow, so does these different markets grows. And if the housing authority does not get a strong foothold on trying to increase its housing stock or preserve affordable housing in terms of workforce housing and low income and extremely low income housing, anything below the 80% AMI or even so 50% AMI, it's just not a whole lot out there that I'm seeing.
What does it do to the market if we own it? And what is the, so we purchased one of these units, it's got 150 units in it. And we ended up getting 10 of those, right?
Mhm.
We got now 1,500 units out there just floating around. But what does that do to the market for the people who are out there? We have the ability to turn that into, because the pushback from the people who own these properties are going to be, we're already affordable, right? And if we purchase it from them, what is that going to do to the market?
Well, some of them may want to get out of business. Some of them, you have a lot of investors here. This is our core business of housing, low-income families. This is our business. For most of these folks that own these complexes, basically, they are just investors, and they really don't have an invested stake in the community other than to see it as a profitable entity. And that's why in some cases, in my professional opinion, you have a lot of these properties that are not managed correctly and have many of these issues because it's not their business. It's hard to get investors to understand the value of true property management and managing the properties. So if we took over the property or we purchased the property, this is our craft, this is our business, and I think that we are very good at what we do. We add to we in addition to the community more so than a distraction to the community.
Yeah. Okay, I'm asking that question because currently there's a debate going on around existing project that another organization is trying to build new workforce housing, and the community is pushing back against the surrounding community is pushing back because they believe that that all of a sudden is going to bring in a different element. And I'm wondering, I know that we do. I know the standard for us is higher
Yes.
than it is for the private owners typically. And I want people to feel like there are assertions that we're going to do a better job of taking care of the community than some of these private owners. And that's I think that's what what I want to come out of.
Yes.
Part of the acquisition process is to assure that and make the community feel good that when we come in, it's going to be better for the community than what the previous owners were accustomed to providing.
And I agree with you, Commissioner. And this is the whole thing with our new branding and our image and what we do, because too many times we get stigmatized by these other management companies that manage these low-income properties where you have most of your issues and concerns at. So when they come up in the news or they come up in the conversation, the first thing they say is the housing authority, when it's not really the housing authority. So we just want to make sure that we're out there and we're managing properties. Again, this is our profession, to the best of our ability. And it'll take a little time, but I think we're getting there. Typically, when you look at public housing, everybody knows that housing authority is good. It's just going into these other markets that they haven't seen what the housing authority does. And I think that we are very well trained and property management and understand property management very well enough and have grown over the last couple of years and skill set to be able to do a very good job in any opportunity that presents itself to us.
Mr. Phillips?
Thank you for that
Yes.
information, for sharing that. Just as, I believe I heard you say that the rents are up 20%. The
Yeah.
cost of acquisition has skyrocketed, and I don't know what the number is, but I know I get people calling me every day about wanting to buy a piece of property that I own. And so it doesn't appear that this is a buyer's market right now. Are we going to be the recommended, if we move forward with any of these, the recommended purchase price, is that what they're asking for these units, or has an analysis been done to determine if there is a fair market price?
So the prices that we have there are what they're asking for.
Okay,
But
that's
we
the
go,
asking price.
yes, and we go back sometimes and may offer something different. Because right now, most of these properties out here, investors coming in with cash, they close it in 10 days. They may have a listing price at one number, and now to a point is like, who shows up with the money fast enough gets the property. And really, they are, I say it again, Jacksonville is a hot box. They have close to 5,000 units underneath construction right now, and it's just a small percentage of them is for affordable housing.
So, and just to follow up with that, if, number one, I think that we ought to change what we're saying in here. If that's the asking price that they're asking for it, what I don't want is us to be paying a premium for properties, which limits our ability to buy additional properties. We ought to be looking to make sure that we're paying a fair and reasonable price and looking at where the market is, so that maybe we ought to, seller's market, look to be in a buyer's market when we're buying property.
Yeah.
If our intent is to increase the number of available affordable housing
Yes.
units, we ought not be buying stuff at a premium per se.
That is correct.
Unless, and there may be some circumstances where we would look at it, for instance, at the beach, we know that workforce housing is like non-existent. And there may be an opportunity to do something in that area that is supported. So each project has to stand on its own. But yeah, I think that we've got to be sensitive to the market that we're in when we're looking at acquisition.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. And I would add in there that we did look at a property. The asking price was $80 million. And at one point, it might not be the one I have in here, but they paid $40 million just October of 2019. So if I see something out there based on our acquisition team knowledge and skill that we can get for 40 million, I'm just using that for a number, and we can get $80 million in 24 months, we would try to take that all day long. Just to be able to bring money into it. I'm not saying that we were 40 million, but anything, when you're talking about getting a good value of something, getting something and
Because we're not looking to flip properties.
No.
Because that's expanding the number of affordable units that are available, but I get your point. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Commissioner, to your point, and then, Mr. Alexander, anything else on,
No.
okay, thank you. So, I'm going to move to, new business for a second, if I may. And to this point, Commissioner Griggs and Commissioner Phillips and others, we've previously batted this around. We batted this around at governance committee, and talked about this. So, Mr. Alexander, to me, you and I have discussed the fact, you made the point earlier that moving quickly is what everybody wants to do, all cash purchases. That's not us, obviously. That's just not us. However, I would like to go ahead and establish an ad hoc committee, which will be focused on acquisitions and modernization or redevelopment. I am happy to serve on that committee. And it would make sense to probably have two other commissioners on that committee. I see Commissioner Green nodding his head. I see Ms. Brock raising their hand. Commissioner Phillips, if you'd like to join us as well, but I do think it makes sense to have that committee to review these opportunities. So I don't think I need a vote, correct? Esteemed council? So established. So it'll be the acquisition and modernization committee. And that committee will be myself, Commissioner Green, Commissioner Brock, and Commissioner Phillips, and of course, any commissioner, Commissioner Griggs, is welcome to attend any of those meetings. But I think that is a wise first step to begin evaluating what we want to do and not want to do. The one thing, Mr. Alexander, you and I have talked about, which I want to bring up to the board as a whole, is there are these opportunities that exist. You've mentioned to me that they were brought to you by independent third parties, which I would add to the board. Some people, some groups are starting to pay attention to our to our meetings as they're now beginning to approach the housing authority with opportunities, which I think is interesting. However, to the board, I would posit that these opportunities can't go any further unless Mr. Alexander begins actually talking to these groups to figure out what they can and can't do, what the deal would look like, et cetera, which then would need to revert to the acquisition committee for a recommendation to come before the board. That would be the process that Mr. Alexander and I talked about. It would be a relatively straightforward process. The acquisition committee would expect a full financial analysis and underwriting of the transactions, which Mr. Alexander has shared with me is more detailed than I ever wanted to know as a sample. But, Mr. Alexander, my direction, absent a board objection for any reason, would be to please begin speaking with these groups that are approaching you, define what a transaction would look like to them, and then bring it before the ad hoc committee so we can discuss it. Because I don't know, I'm not sure what else. I'm not sure the committee would be the appropriate place to try and decide what that outline would look like. In other words, just putting something on the table, we would have no clue. I want to hear from you and your team what you think is the right structure or solution. Does any commissioners have any questions or concerns around that? Obviously, Mr. Alexander, it goes without saying that please don't go out and buy an $80 million property without our consent. Commissioner Griggs.
I would only add that any recommendations or analysis brought forward by the committee be also reviewed by the finance committee.
I concur. Commissioner Griggs, that's a great point. So it'll be a dual review, Mr. Alexander, one by the acquisition modernization committee with a recommendation, one by the finance committee to ensure that we're not overextending ourselves in any fashion. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner Green. Commissioner Green, any comments?
So isn't there a Jacksonville financing housing authority?
Yes. So the Commissioner Green, to your question, there is a Jacksonville Housing Finance Authority. However, they do not buy and or acquire housing. They approve the financing. So the bonds, we would more likely than not go through the Jacksonville Housing Finance Authority to issue the bonds to buy it, et cetera. Yes, sir. That's my understanding, at least. Any other questions? Mr. Alexander, go forth and do. And let us know when you have projects that you need the acquisition committee to begin reviewing and opining on. The next one, Mr. Alexander, I'd like to dive in under new business is your memorandum. At the governance committee meeting, we began talking about the need for a potential subpoena. The governance committee recommended, coming out of the governance committee, the recommendation was to the board to consider a framework by which this organization would then have the authority and power, or more politely put, the structure to go ahead and issue said subpoenas. Thank you for putting this together on short notice. I was not expecting that, but this is a useful first framework. I want to open up this to the board. I believe Commissioner Griggs was there, Commissioner Phillips was there around this conversation, but I do think it bears merit to have a discussion around a high-level framework like this and what the next steps would be. So knowing that this was just put in front of you today, I do not expect to take action on this today, but I do think it's time that this body begin to offer its thoughts and comments around a structure. Mr. Alexander, what understanding that OGC has not reviewed this, you informed me of that, but understanding, kind of give me your thoughts behind this framework and where do you see this like how would you expand upon this?
Well, if for discussion, we thought that we would actually reach out and prepare a letter to Cambridge, the management company, and propose a subpoena requesting that the management company confirm their commitment to respond within 10 business days. Giving them just like a extended hand, hey, listen, we're going to issue a subpoena, but you have the opportunity to reach out and provide this information, inspections, work orders, capital improvements, whatever. And if they don't do it, then we'll serve a subpoena to the property, perfect services of the process of the subpoena to the property management company after the expiration of the 10 days of deadline, proposed in the correspondence and the expiration of the proposed deadline of the receipt of the documents. After we get all this, after we receive the records, we will analyze the records 30 days, and then we will issue recommendations to the governance committee. And the governance committee from there can, request additional information, request a further investigation, issue recommendations, or the governance committee may or may not choose to discuss the recommendation report, and the governance committee may request a vote for the adoption of the recommendation report to present to the full board.
Okay, so Mr. Alexander, it seems to me, not in a bad way, but it seems to me this is the baseline for how we get to a hypothetical recommendation before it comes to the board to take action. And then I would presume the next steps would be working with OGC to expand upon this policy with more, what's the word I'm looking for? Opportunity for repartee between the necessary parties. And then also the next step is obviously having a board policy around what we do with it. It may be a heightened level of, maybe it's not 4 commissioners, maybe it needs to be 5 commissioners that make a recommendation, or maybe something else like that. I do think it's wise, Mr. Alexander, and to my esteemed colleagues, that there is that first step, which is a formal but friendly-ish letter saying, here it comes. I that's new. That was not discussed, but that's new, which I think is a wise framework, which I think is interesting. Does any commissioners have comment on this outline at this point? Commissioner Griggs?
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you, Ms. Alexander, for being able to respond to this so quickly, because it was just the end of last week. I guess it was Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. But I think, like you mentioned, an entry point, right? I think we do need an entry point to say, how do we get here? Why are you being asked to provide this information? So we need to be able to explain, what triggered this response. We're conducting an investigation, and we've got this information, or we've heard, or we didn't comply with, or whatever, and now we're conducting an investigation. We're requesting the following information. If we don't comply with that, then we have the right under authority to to request it by subpoena. You have this much amount of time to do that. And then if you don't do that, then these are the other steps which are outlined here. So I think if, you know, from their perspective, I think you were fortunate to have them respond, right? When you called them, I guess you called them some email, for them to respond with anything initially, probably out of courtesy. But if we come in and say, hey, you know, we got this rule that says we can subpoena you for information, you know, that's probably too much too soon.
Yeah. Yeah, Commissioner Griggs, I'll say, I think as I'm sitting here just thinking through this on the spot, I think that letter, the initial correspondence would be a great way to say, this is what triggered our interest. This is why we're interested. And this is how we found out about it. And based on that information, we'd like you to voluntarily comply. I think that's a great, because I was giving thought to our governance committee, you mentioned it there, and it's almost, I went back and looked at the statutes and let's see, Ms. Hodges, please feel free to correct me. The investigation authority is fairly broad. So because I was thinking to your point, how do we trigger when we would actually look at something? And it almost comes down to a case by case situation. You know, today may be, you know, rodents, tomorrow may be a roof collapse, the day after may be, you know, making it up, you know, alligators in the lawn. I don't know. But I think the letter, and Mr. Alexander, I don't know if you stole that from somewhere. That was original thought, which I really like it though. I think the letter gives us that chance to establish what it is we're looking for and why we're looking for it. But that's a first step, if that makes sense.
And then what's going to happen as a result of you providing information.
That's
Which
correct.
for us will be providing recommendations to an additional governing body, which is not us because we don't have enforcement capability. So whatever comes out of that investigation, you know, whether it's complied with voluntarily or through subpoena, we're going to be providing a final recommendation from this authority to, you know, the legislature, the city, whoever it is, you know, and as from the housing authority.
And I think that's where I would task Mr. Alexander and OGC to start beginning a more detailed policy around, you know, listing the primary authorities that we may report to, but, you know, we're not going to hold ourselves to that. If we think there's somebody else that it needs to go to, that's, you know, we should be able to do that.
We may be asked.
We may be asked.
We may be asked by, you know, some authority, maybe city council, or whoever, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, and then if it's done, so we have a process in place, you know, to conduct an investigation and provide recommendations.
Yeah. Any other comments, particularly on this policy? Because then I want to bring to the board's attention the conversations we had at governance committee as well, just so we're all informed. Great. So Mr. Alexander, on this, I think I'd task you with going back with senior staff and OGC to start really fleshing out this policy, what it would look like, how we define this. It should come before the governance committee, hopefully by next month. And then we can take it up from the board once the governance committee has made a recommendation one way or the other. Relative to this point, obviously this is being put in front of us, thrust in front of us as a result of Hilltop Gardens in particular. I'll let the board know, as I let the governance committee know. I've been contacted by both local, state officials asking what we're going to do about it. I have again politely explained that we do not have quote unquote authority to do anything. They have politely been watching our meetings or listening into our meetings, which I appreciate. And they have been asking us when we're going to investigate, to which I've said the prudent thing, as we discussed at our last governance meeting, is going to be to make sure we do this the right way, not just ad hoc. However, I say to this board, which is there is a public eye on us at this moment. I'm asking what we're going to do. And the only thing we can do, in my opinion, is to begin to look into this. So accordingly, my direction to Mr. Alexander also would be, absent board directing otherwise, would be, I'd like to see what this initial correspondence would be with OGC's review so that we can decide. So we can begin to look at this and decide you know, is this format correct? What are we going to do? How do we want to do it? I do not, in my purview, do not want this agency to be seen as doing nothing. And not that we're not doing nothing, but perception is reality. This specific topic has come up, and now that it's making me uncomfortable. When we say we're working on policies and procedures, that is the right thing to do, I might add. But I think it would be prudent to begin drafting those and also begin drafting this letter with OGC. So that should we approve something or should we find the need, it can go out. Any other commissioners have any thoughts on that? Fantastic. Mr. Alexander, the public chair's comments first, and then right quick in hour and 5 minutes. That ain't so bad, folks. First thing I want to commend you on, I did have a chance, like Mr. Griggs, I'm still going through the year-end review, but I will say I focused on a couple of metrics that I looked at. The operations of this agency speak for themselves. And on behalf of the board, I will tell you thank you, and to senior staff. It is clear that you guys are continuing to hone in, continuing to be specific, continuing to be intentional, and that does not go without notice. So I commend you and senior staff for that. Thank you. The other thing that I'll mention, Mr. Alexander, is I looked at the, excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. There's a lot going on inside there, Commissioner Griggs. In any event, I don't think I had anything else at this point in time. Huh. Is that something in the book, Commissioner? Yeah, well, clearly not that important. Anything else from any other commissioner at this point in time? Hearing nothing, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second it.
I have a motion and a second. Any debate or discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it. Yeah, really.